U.S. President Donald Trump has set a new tariff countdown clock for Canada and Mexico, part of his America First policy addressed by his first confirmed member of cabinet, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, today. Take a listen.
He's given us a very clear mandate. President Trump's made it very clear. Everything we do, and this is true in government, but especially at the Department of State, everything we do must be justified by the answer to one of three questions. Does it make us stronger? Does it make us safer? And does it make us more prosperous? If it doesn't do one of those three things, we will not do it. So that is the goal, and that is the task, and that is the promise that he was elected to keep, and that is the promise he will keep, and we will help him keep.
Federal cabinet ministers on this side of the border spent the day huddled in a war room-like setting, crafting their response.
Of course, if the president does choose to proceed with tariffs on Canada, Canada will respond. And everything is on the table.
Say no to Canada, be mindful you're saying yes to. You're probably saying yes to China on critical mineral. You're probably saying yes to Venezuela on crude oil.
Canadians know the facts. We are not, there is no criminal trafficking of fentanyl to the United States from Canada. We represent less than 1% of any illegal crossings. It is a border that has two sides. We also have, things that we want to talk to them about how we manage our border. So that's where we need to be paying attention.
With me now to talk about Team Canada's Trump 2.0 posture is our friend Benj. Former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant is here. He's now the CEO of Space Canada. Shakir Chambers is a vice president at Oyster Group. He worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. CTV News political analyst and former federal NDP leader Tom Mulcair is with us, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park bureau chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Tom, I'll start with you. I just interviewed Minister Mark Miller, who was in that cabinet meeting all day. Essentially, he could only convey what we're reading, which is it could be February 1st, which Donald Trump said last night. It could be April 1st, which is the conclusion of the study in the executive order. There's no clarity whatsoever being communicated to cabinet. What does that tell you about how challenging this will be politically?
Welcome, as you correctly said, Vassy, to Donald Trump 2.0. It is chaos, as usual. The April 1st deadline was the one that was written down in a formal government order. And then Trump, out of the blue, in answer to a question from a journalist as he was signing many of his presidential orders, simply said, we're looking at February 1st, and 25%, and said terrible things about Canada being an abuser. So this is where we are. Canada is doing the right thing. Kirsten Hillman, bless her. I mean, she's just the adult in the room and all this stuff. She's able to talk with Americans at the highest level. She's making sure that enough Americans understand that this idea of tariffs is simply another way of saying a tax on everything for American consumers and trying to explain it and getting enough people on side. It's not going to stop Trump. He sees this as a source of revenue and right now understands that he has to try to do something to get out of the terrible debt situation that they're in. So he's talking about getting money for free from other countries, but there's no such thing. And I think Canada's response thus far has been to say everything's on the table. We're going to keep pushing. We're going to make sure that our point of view is heard. But it's not a good situation to be in because instability and uncertainty are never good for the economy, and it's certainly not good for Canadians as a whole.
Benzie, some provincial governments, like the one you cover in Doug Ford, seem to be really putting it out there that they're going to need a new mandate in order to respond to those tariffs should they be imposed. I think Newfoundland is going to head to Newfoundland and Labrador will head to the polls fairly soon as well. What do you make of kind of that push in light of what might come from Trump?
Vassy, I've talked about this a lot. Premier Doug Ford has been really out front on this stuff. He's the chair of the Council of the Federation of Premiers, and he's been in lockstep with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's federal Liberals saying, look, we need to have a strong response. It's quite a contrast to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who has been more of an appeaser. Well, that appeasement strategy hasn't worked. And I think Mr. Ford, I'm speaking to his folks today because they're getting ready for an election that could be launched as early as next Wednesday, a week tomorrow. They feel that he was vindicated for taking the strong stance by Trump's comment last night after our former colleague Josh Wingrove asked the question in the Oval Office of what about Canada? And then all of a sudden, 1% or 25% on February 1st. Everyone's like, what? So it's, I mean, there is going to be an election in Ontario sooner rather than later. And I think in Newfoundland and Labrador as well.
It sort of points to, Shakir, the idea that, and both Tom and Rob are speaking to this, it's sucking up all the political oxygen here in Canada. And I don't know if that changes anytime soon. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't think it'll change because it's just a level of uncertainty. I mean, Tom kind of alluded to that, we don't know what's going on our end, but I don't think the Trump team knows what's going on their end either. I feel like the Trump team, I think they're very confused. I mean, I think for Donald Trump, I think he does realize that implementing tariffs are going to cost a lot of political capital for him. If you were watching that speech yesterday, the inauguration address, when he was talking about tariffs, that was one of the only moments when Republican lawmakers weren't giving him a resounding round of applause about the policy measures he was going to take. And I think if you even read some of the reporting today from Washington, Trump's own internal team members are still confused about how they want to implement this. Even last week, I think you were interviewing Jonathan Wilkinson, Vassy, and he was saying that, when he was talking to U.S. representatives, they had 3 options, but they were undecided about how they wanted to do this. So I think on the Trump team's end, they don't know what they're doing yet. They don't know how they want to implement it yet. And I think if it really comes down to a fact-based conversation, I'm hard-pressed to believe Canada is going to see 25% across the board on all items. I think we probably will see tariffs, but not as aggressive as Trump is talking right now because we're so intertwined.
The if there, though, is, Brian, if it does come down to facts. And if Trump were making those decisions, but I mean that genuinely, like if he were making those decisions based on facts, he probably wouldn't be pursuing tariffs in the first place. He obviously sees, and he said this multiple times yesterday, great utility in and of themselves, beyond just all the other stuff we're talking about, borders, negotiating. He said it 15 times. They're a beautiful thing. How hard does that make it for Canada to press its case?
First off, that question is going to be the question for his whole mandate, right? Will facts actually ever really be a consideration? And I think you're absolutely right to say what you just said. I think he's a believer. I think his team is filled with believers, not all of them, but a lot of them. And I think to them, they say to themselves, yeah, this is going to work. And as Benzie put it, we'll get some free money. And that's just not going to be the case. And unfortunately, we're going to have to see it play out. They're going to have to see it play out and actually test their theory. And with that test, they're going to see Americans, I think, start to complain because prices are going to go up, and they're going to have governors and they're going to have representatives start to complain. And then, of course, Canada, as Tom mentioned, I think they're doing the right thing, preparing to be able to go dollar for dollar. And essentially, if they do it as the way that they most likely will, be very strategic and try to hit products and services that will hit some of the states that would be key allies and key states for the Trump administration. By doing that, on top of the tariffs the U.S. would be putting on, it's going to be a rough go for Americans, of course, a rough go for Canadians. The only challenge that sounds kind of okay from our point of view of kind of pushing back. The only challenge, though, is the Americans truly believe, the Trump administration truly believe, I should say, that war, that sort of tit for tat between Canada and U.S. will hurt Canada more than it hurts the U.S., which is probably true. So that is going to be very difficult for all of us, but we have to sort of stick together, Team Canada, and hopefully the targeted approach to the states get those representatives really going to the Trump administration asking for change.